Okay, we are going to talk about lower motor neurons now. And so lower motor neurons, they are the only neurons that convey signals to extrafusal and interfusal skeletal muscle fibers. So in chapter 6, I sort of skimmed over extrafusal and interfusal, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit now, briefly. So when we talk about extrafusal and intrafusal, extrafusal muscle fibers are those on the outside of the muscle fiber, outside of the myofibril. The intrafusal are on the inside, and that is what we refer to as the muscle spindle. So that muscle spindle is the intrafusal fiber. It's on the inside of a myofibril. It's sending out that afferent sensory information that we use for proprioception and that stretch reflex that the muscle spindle responds to, and it's innervated by a different motor neuron. Okay, so the two different types of lower motor neurons are the alpha and the gamma. The alpha motor neurons, they convey signals to the extrafusal fibers, and the gamma motor neurons convey signals to the intrafusal fibers. So we'll talk about each one of those specifically. Those are the two types of lower motor neurons. Both alpha and gamma motor neurons have cell bodies in the ventral horn of the spinal cord. So that's where their cell bodies are. They're the rest of the cells running in those spinal tracts, and we'll talk a little bit more about the spinal tracts. But specifically the alpha motor neurons, they have large cell bodies and large myelinated axons. So remember, the larger the axon, the more myelinated it is, the faster it transmits information. Okay, so the alpha motor neurons, the large myelinated axons, fast information. They project to those extrafusal skeletal muscles, and they branch into numerous terminals as they approach the muscle. So they branch out and they have a whole bunch of synapses, those neuromuscular junctions, where they release that acetylcholine to contract the muscle fibers. So normally, in a normal nervous system, an alpha motor neuron releases enough acetylcholine that all of the muscle fibers that it innervates contract at the same time. Okay, so that has a lot to do with our muscle power and how we do things. So it's the outside of the bundle, those extrafusal skeletal muscle fibers. The gamma motor neurons, they consist of medium-sized myelinated axons, so they're not the super slow like the less myelinated small ones, but they are slower than the alphas, medium-sized myelinated. And the axons of the gamma motor neurons project to intrafusal fibers in the muscle spindle. Okay, and that's the same area where we get the afferent information about that stretch reflex. Okay, so if you just remember that there are two types, alpha and gamma, the alpha project to extrafusal muscle fibers and have large cell bodies and large myelinated axons. The gamma project to intrafusal muscle fibers, the muscle spindle, and have medium myelinated axons. So they use the little Greek letters. So when you see the thing looks like a little fish, that's the Greek letter alpha, and it's showing the alpha motor neurons going from the ventral horn of the spinal cord, and it's branching off into a whole bunch of little branches and innervating the skeletal muscle. So a motor unit consists of an alpha motor neuron and the muscle fibers it innervates. So in the picture here, it's showing two motor units. So you'll see muscle fibers that are innervated by a single neuron are distributed throughout the muscle. So you might have lots of different neurons innervating the muscle. Remember back in chapter 5 when we were talking about development, and we said that initially in development there are a whole bunch of motor neurons innervating the muscle, hundreds perhaps, and then it works its way down to fewer of them. But still you have multiple motor neurons innervating a muscle. Okay, so alpha and gamma coactivation is where the motor neurons function simultaneously, and this happens during most movements, And it's to maintain stretch on the intrafusal fibers during active contraction. And the reason that we want to maintain stretch on that muscle spindle, those intrafusal fibers, is so then the sensory information that's going back to the cerebellum that's saying how long is the muscle, how fast is it stretching, that information is being sent back accurately. So we want the intrafusal fibers and the extrafusal fibers to be close to the same length, so you're getting accurate information back to the cerebellum. There's a little video on alpha-gamma co-activation, but they activate at the same time, so they keep the muscle spindle and the rest of the muscle fibers close to the same length. So the motor units, which are the motor neuron and the muscle fibers it innervates, are the parts of the muscle that are classified as slow twitch or fast twitch. So you probably heard these words in A&P and perhaps in kinesiology. Slow twitch versus fast twitch. The slow twitch muscle fibers are most of the postural muscles. They contract slowly, such as the soleus. They're the sort of your endurance muscles, because postural muscles have to have endurance all day. They're holding us up. The fast twitch are the powerful muscles, like the gastroc. And so most of the movements that activate, most of the movements that we do activate slow twitch fibers first, because they have smaller cell bodies and they depolarize first. But they continue to contribute after the fast twitch are activated. So there are a lot of little videos in this one. There's a little video on fast and slow twitch muscle fibers. And just really know which ones activate first. And it's the slow twitch. So there's this thing, it's called Henneman's size principle. It was discovered back in the day when people used to like to name things after themselves. And it says that the order of recruitment goes from smaller to larger alpha motor neurons. So smaller to larger muscle units, basically, motor units. So the exception on that is when you're doing fast alternating movements like pronation and supinating. Going back and forth from pronation to supination. And with certain synergistic activation of muscles. But all normal movements require that sensory information for that feed forward and feed back, spinal circuitry, so we need the spinal connection, and the descending commands from the cerebral cortex. Okay, so we'll talk a little bit about descending motor pathways. Not a huge amount, but a little bit about it. So just like the ascending sensory pathways, we have our descending motor pathways, and they're all running in the spinal cord. Okay, so the somatosensory information is integrated with descending motor commands to generate the motor output. So there are pools of lower motor neurons that may extend several spinal cord segments. So in this picture they show, I like how they have the little arms showing flexors and extensors. So in the gray matter of the spinal cord, you have the bodies of those motor neurons, and so the extensors are all kind of together, the flexors are together, and then the distal muscles are together, and they're kind of arranged. It's sort of like the homunculus arrangement of the sensory fibers up in the cerebral cortex. You get a similar thing where it's organized in that fashion in the spinal cord. But the second picture, you see the lower motor neurons are kind of crossing through each other, and they can go over several spinal segments. So there are pools of motor neurons, and they are activating either axial muscles or postural girdle muscles, and so those are the medial ones, and the laterally located pools get the distal limb muscles. So the more posterior ones in the anterior horn innervate the flexor muscles, and the anterior ones innervate the extensor muscles. So the pools they all kind of pool together and do the same thing. So where this kind of comes in, like we say, oh, well, why do we care? Because when you get someone with an incomplete spinal cord injury, you might get different muscles affected. If it's an anterior spinal cord injury, they are likely to have more effect on their extensor muscles than their flexor muscles. So what does that affect? Oh my gosh, sitting and standing, that's all extensors, right? Hip extensors, knee extensors. So that's a big deal. If it's more of a posterior one, it's going to be the flexor muscles. So those are going to be affected in different ways. So incomplete spinal cord injuries are pretty interesting because they kind of give us a clue as to what's going on in the spinal cord. So the alpha and the gamma motor neurons and the sensory information that's coming from the muscles, they work with each other to perform reciprocal inhibition. And I think that we've talked about this in other classes, and we'll talk about it more in therapeutic exercise when you have it this summer. So often when a muscle is activated, opposition to the opposing movement, the antagonist muscles, is prevented by inhibitory neurons. So in this picture, the quadriceps are contracting, its alpha motor neuron is contracting, and there's an inhibitory, so the sensory information from that muscle spindle is going up and inhibiting the hamstrings to contract, so you're not preventing your motion. So it's just, you have that circuit that helps prevent the opposing muscle, the antagonist muscle, from contracting. And we can use that in stretching and different other techniques. When we're doing contract relax or hold relax muscle stretching techniques, we are using that reciprocal inhibition to inhibit the antagonist muscle. So when we talk about muscle synergies, there are two different. We talk about synergy in a normal nervous system versus synergy in a pathological nervous system. So in a normal nervous system, muscle synergies are coordinated muscle actions where the muscles are activated together, like elbow flexion and forearm supination during eating. We do both of them together. It's a coordinated movement. They're acting to help each other. Often we also use the word synergy to describe a pathological mass movement that results from an upper motor neuron lesion, and we'll talk way more about this in the cerebral cortex chapter. But they have a picture of a lady here in a pathological example. You can't produce an individual joint movement outside of the total movement pattern. So this lady, she has had a stroke on her right side. She's trying to raise both hands over her head, but she's getting an interruption in the corticospinal tracts, which are one of the descending tracts, and she's unable to combine shoulder flexion with elbow extension. So when she flexes her shoulder, her elbow also flexes, and that's that synergy movement. So the descending signals from that reticulospinal tract gets that abnormal synergy in the right upper limb, and we'll talk about the different spinal tracts a little bit later. So there is a system in our body, it's called a proprioceptive body schema. It's used to plan and adapt to movements, and it's that sensory information from our joint capsule and ligament receptors and muscle spindle receptors and Golgi tendon organs, providing that proprioceptive input, and it's like a pattern of your body in your brain that contributes to being able to contract and relax muscles in a way that we can use our movements in a natural way. So when that is interrupted, we get abnormal movement patterns. So depending on what you're trying to do, the Golgi tendon organ either facilitates or inhibits the lower motor neuron firing. So you don't really need to know a lot about that, but just know that where our sensory and our motor information integrates to perform our normal movements. That's the really cool thing about it. So we're just going to talk about two types of stretch reflexes, and then I will wrap up this section, and the next section will be on upper motor neurons. So the first type of stretch reflex is a phasic stretch reflex, where the muscle contracts in response to a quick stretch. So that's the one we talk about with the muscle spindle. Stretch is really really fast, and the muscle spindle contracts the muscle to prevent joint injury. A tonic stretch reflex continues as long as the stretch is maintained. So the phasic stretch reflex is that's where the our tendon reflexes come from. We get a quick stretch by hitting the tendon, and we get the quick muscle contraction in response to that. The tonic stretch, as long as we maintain that stretch, we're getting a little bit of muscle tone in response to that. Okay, so we're going to wrap this up. In the next section, we'll talk about upper motor neurons.